Colleagues, we are currently in the process of going live, so give it just a few seconds and then we'll officially start. Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'll call this work session to order at 5:02 p.m. And to kick us off, we have Point North Strategic Planning presented by Dr. Ricky Smith or Dr. Moore?
Actually, what we'll start with this evening is the Tigard-Tualatin equity audits in preparation then to transition to Point North, introducing our new partners and have them share their work.
Perfect. We'll flip that. So I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Bowman, Vice Chair Lynn, directors. This evening, it's a pleasure to begin the work with you relative to the strategic planning process. We're grateful to have our partners with us this evening and look forward to having them introduce themselves to the full board and to the community. This evening, however, we wanted to first anchor into our equity work as it is called out in the educational equity and racial justice policy relative to an equity audit that the superintendent and or her team should conduct. Director Zinnia Un, who's with me here at the table, and I might add, today is her birthday, so you might want to wish her well. Yes, I love doing that.
We can do it before you grab Zoom.
No. Absolutely, I think a whole community, round of happy birthdays in order. That said, wanted her to share the work that she has done to date relative to our equity pillars and will continue to do throughout the rest of the year as foundational information for that will serve to inform our strategic planning process. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Director Un to lead us through this slide deck that is in front of you.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Perfect. So tonight we're gonna have a short and sweet primer to our conversation around equity audits and how we utilize them in our district. So we're going to talk a little bit about what are equity audits, how have we engaged in equity audits in the past, how is TTSD conducting equity audits, what data will we look at or have we looked at, and what are the implications for strategic planning and investments. So what are equity audits? Equity audits are a leadership tool used to collect the data that informs the process of removing programmatic barriers that impede full participation, access, and opportunity for all students to receive an equitable and excellent education. With this process, leaders can assess the extent to which equity is present in such areas such as teacher quality, overall instructional setting, and student achievement and attainment. Equity audits support proactive leaders with assessing and planning for campus improvement that addresses specific cultural, linguistic, social, economic, and racial dynamics present in school community. And at TTSD, we know we have our goals of closing the gap for 5% for all students and 8% for students who are historically underserved. We also recognize that accelerating outcomes for our historically underserved communities require the understanding of the barriers that are present for students and families and working with all the key stakeholders in our systems to actively address and support equity of outcomes. Equity audits are a part of what we at TTSD do as part of our improvement science component in our work. Dr. McCall and I often lead sessions with our equity leaders related to the first three principles of improvement science, which is being problem-focused and user-centered, attend to variability, and see the system as those in our stakeholders see them.
Cindy did not.
Oh, yep. Sorry. There it is. Yep. I was moving this one and not that one. Thank you for your assist. So how have we at TTSD engaged in equity audits? Well, we used, you all have had an opportunity to do roundtables with our administrators, right? So we start off with current reality and the data, including our demographics data, but also quantitative data related to outcomes and so forth. In that data, including attendance, engagement data, office discipline referrals, exclusion data, summative assessments, academic tracks, and participation in extracurricular activities or enrichment programs, we see through various protocols that we have within our district, where are the areas of disproportionality? And then with that, we try to understand root cause by engaging in our stakeholders and understanding the cause of those problems. Some of the outcomes that you've seen already, which I really am proud of in our district, is that we make equity work less elusive and more concrete. And so with that, after, I look at it as like a flashlight, right? When you look at what are the things that we're seeing as equity gaps, and then checking within the various stakeholders and honoring their lived experiences to understand fully why the problem persists. And as you see here, some of the outcomes of equity audits have been our investment in professional development, such as our leadership series, supporting our admin, TOSIS, building equity coordinators around equitable critical reflection and being able to understand how to engage with community partners as well as students and families to ensure better outcomes. We've also seen that in budget and strategic planning and investments, as well as some of the work that you all have led related to the educational equity and racial justice policy, as Dr. Sue Smith had highlighted, ACB, all students, every student belong, and JVC and GVB, which is part of our each committee work. Social emotional learning, diversification and capacity development for staff, SIA investments, school resource officers in the new scope of work, school-wide improvements, and also in partnership with students, the work around the audit of eliminating pay-to-play fees. So those are some concrete items for how we've used equity audits. So what are the implications of equity audits and strategic planning? Well, like I said earlier, starting with data, starting there and understanding where those disproportionality lies, we focus on those equity gaps. And in those equity gaps, we also then seek out the work that we've led within our equity department by bringing in leadership, staff, students, families, and communities to really understand the root of the problem. And then from there, we plan equity-focused investments, initiatives, and/or interventions. And then as a part of that process, we include stakeholders as part of the feedback for impact, progress, and outcomes. And you see that in our EASH committees, in our SRO committees, when once we make a participatory decision, we don't just say that that's done, we actually say this is the start of the work and bring our community in. And as I highlighted earlier, we partner with our equity pillars. So we talk to our leadership, those that know the content, right, best. We talk to our staff who are implementing these concepts, and then also our students, families, and community members for which the outcomes benefit and offer insight to how we're doing. And how is TTSD conducting some of those equity audits? We've seen it in the work the last 3 to 5 years. We had some very intentional focus. Another way of looking at an equity audit is focused observations and regarding the health of our system. So a few years ago within our work budget groups, we talked about social emotional learning. And then a lot of that, we see some of the work that we have right now related to our EASH plan, so culture and climate and so forth, our conversations around our SROs, well-rounded education in partnership with students to eliminate some of the barriers for extracurricular activities. Some of the data that you've already seen, SIP data, as well as the presentation that Director Fields had offered of last board meeting. And then also some perception data. How are our teachers, staff, and those that are implementing the services to our community members, how do they see the professional development or what is needed to do their work? And then also we have seen through the basic needs gaps and then family and voice perception data to focus on our work on building community engagement and partnership efforts. So we hope that this is a good primer for the conversation that we have with our new partners as we talk about strategic investments moving forward. I think that's it. Questions from the board?
Colleagues joining virtually, do you have any questions or comments for Director Munn or Dr. Ricky Smith? Can we take the slides down so we can see?
Well, I'll start by saying thank you very much for this comprehensive overview of the process. I learned a lot. I knew about a lot of this work, but I feel like I learned quite a bit just in listening to you talk about, all of the work in its totality and the impact that it's had. So congratulations on getting all of this done. This is not easy work. I was just curious about, sort of the perception data from the teachers or staff, and then thinking about the data from the students and whether to the extent to which those data points align or not. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. So thank you for that, Dr. Lynn. As we know, I think this is why equity work is really important, because we're talking about sustainable systems. And when we talk about sustainable systems, we have to vet it through all of our stakeholders. So a very current and apt example was when we did do listening sessions and focus groups related to hate speech bias incidences. Some of the things that came up there were some of the things that staff and admin had highlighted as barriers, as well as some of the things that students, families, and grandparents, because it was a generational issue as well. That when we take a look at where do we prioritize and where do we focus and where do we bring forth the work, we do crosswalks across the various stakeholders so that we know that with such a complex topic, it's really important to find convergence so that we can have a strong foundational point to build from, but then also acknowledge where those voices can allow for a deeper understanding of implementation, because something that students might offer is different than what families offer, because we work with students every day versus families who are in their home, and there's a different context. So you start off with a crosswalk convergence of all stakeholders, and then you cater to the various stakeholders through ongoing engagement. So that's how I would describe that. But there's always going to be opportunities to calibrate that, which is why we work through various pillars. Because although we want standardization, we also know that that is also at times not equitable because the experiences are different. I don't know if that's helpful or explains.
That's really helpful. The only related question I'll ask, and I'll let other people ask questions. Dr. Sue, we were talking at one point about utilizing the equity audit as sort of a basis for strategic planning. And is this what we're talking about? Is this the data?
Yes, that's exactly right. In the fall, if you all remember, I brought forward several different frameworks for doing an equity audit. And then as I listened to the ongoing work that Zinni was doing just as a natural course in business, it dawned on me that this is probably a great place to anchor, because we are closest to this work. And it is authentic for us. And it is well understood in terms of our pillars. And there are key questions that Director Un has developed relative to each one of those pillars that I think would serve us well, relative to taking a look at the current state and outcomes from the now sunsetting strategic plan into the one that you will bring forward for the next 5 years. And I can't think of better, more authentic data than what almost Director Un has brought forward.
All right. Yes, Director Urban.
So first of all, happy birthday. And so actually, Vice Chair Lynn took the question right out of my mouth originally, which was kind of how, if that same equity audit that we were kind of talking about at the beginning was kind of this same framework that Director Un was talking about. And so that's very helpful. And then I was just going to say, just sort of for my own learning and understanding, the graphic for, and I'm just looking at my notes, but the cycle for the critical reflection and decision making was really helpful. Just kind of seeing that visual of sort of how that works and how you use all those different pieces to start that, programmatic change that we might need to see, or, all those different pieces fall into place. So since my question was sort of answered already, I just wanted to say that thank you for that really, like Dr. Lynn said, comprehensive explanation. And also just for me personally, that little graphic on the critical reflection piece was really helpful. So thank you.
Director Schwartzmead.
Yeah, I would just like to reiterate my thanks. I hadn't realized until I saw this graphic just how much work we've done. I mean, there's all these little pieces, and we focus on one or two of them, at a board meeting, but to see all of them at once, it really fills my heart to know that yes, we are really, you have done so much, and we as a district are doing so much, and it's really gratifying. So thank you.
Okay, well, I think that's a perfect transition then. Should I hand it over to Director Moore for an introduction?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Thank you very much. Happy birthday, Director. Thank you for spending your evening with us. And Director Moore, the floor is yours. And while our friends are coming forward, Thor, if it's possible to keep this screen up there so we can see faces, and then David and I will access PowerPoints via laptop. I think that might be easiest, just so I can see. When you raise your hands, by the way, we can totally see you. So that's a great way to, or you can just unmute. I'm comfortable with either, but I think if we can just access via our personal laptop presentations, we save these screens personal.
If we do that, then we will hold one.
Okay. Okay. Well, we'll calibrate in between work sessions and regular meetings to figure out how we'll do it. But okay. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you for being here. And Director Moore, please.
Thanks, Chair Bowman. Yes, we wanted to take the opportunity this evening to introduce our new partners from Point North related to strategic planning, and allow them at least to see faces of the board, maybe not all in person. And before we headed over here for the meeting, they did provide a handout which Patty sent to you electronically. I also have some hard copies here I can give to everyone. And
Yeah, I bring mine out.
so with that, my comments are going to be brief. I'm going to let maybe board members first introduce themselves, or do you guys want to introduce yourselves first and then board members, however we want to do it?
Yeah, why don't you all introduce yourself, then we'll do a challenge call with the board members, and they can introduce themselves as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here. And despite social distancing and masks, we are thrilled to actually be in person. My name is Lisa Keohokaloli Shower, and I am the president of Point North Consulting. We are members of the team. We're here today. And then we also have another partner that wasn't able to make it today. Actually, they're facilitating an equity advisory group meeting. And that is my kind of co-conspirator, John L. Bell, who is the president of a organization called Espousal Strategy. So together, we are excited to be part of this strategic planning effort. And so I will turn it over to Katie Dye, who's our project manager for this particular effort. Have her introduce herself. And then Jonna Rupley, who's one of our strategic advisors here this evening as well. So Katie?
Yes, I'd be happy to. Hello, everyone. Katie Dye with Point North Consulting. I'm the Director of Strategy at Point North Consulting and have the pleasure of supporting this particular project in a project management role. So I come to the table with 10 or so years of project management experience, both in public, private, and kind of quasi environments. Most recently, prior to Point North Consulting, was in the public sector, working for social service related work, both in education sector fields and supporting parents and students connecting to education related aspirations, which is very fulfilling. And then prior to that, I did some work at Washington State University, Vancouver, supporting accreditation. So I have a little bit of background in education, and I'm a product of the Vancouver public school system, an alumni of Clark College and Washington State University, Vancouver.
Good evening. My name is Jada Rupley, and I am a strategic advisor for Point North. And I have recently just finished as the ESD superintendent for Clackamas ESD, and enjoyed 6 months of time that I was able to spend traveling and doing some work. And I've joined working with this company. I'm very pleased to do that, and I'm looking forward to working with Tigard-Tualatin.
Got the dream team.
We like to think so. One of the great things about bringing Jada on is she was one of our first clients several years ago when we started as a small business. We do work in Washington and Oregon. We're a DBE, which means we're a disadvantaged business enterprise that's gone through that certification process. And we are values led. So we do work in that strategic communication and organizational development space. So what is really important to us is to find that alignment with organizations that center equity. So we're excited to be a part of a conversation tonight around a workshop that has equity front and center. And that is really what we're hoping to do in partnership with each of you, is really lead an equity centered strategic planning approach. So again, thrilled to be here, but interested to, we've had the opportunity to meet a couple of you and spend a little time, but would love to hear a little bit more about each of you.
So I know Vice Chair Lynn and Director Urban were the lead on this. So Dr. Lynn, why don't you kick us off, then we'll go to Director Urban, Director Schwartzmead, Director Hammix, and then I'll wrap it up, and then we'll go to Dr. Sue. All right.
Well, I'll just say that I'm really excited about having you come aboard. And hi, Jada. We worked together when I was dean over at Portland State. So glad to have you there as well. Jada was part of an effort at Portland State to focus on the diversification of the teacher workforce, right? And really brought resources together, brought individuals to the table to really ensure that her ESD was part of the conversation. So I appreciate having you at the table as an experienced leader. And again, just so excited about the work that we're going to do together. I did take a look at the outline and the framework that you sent. Looks great. I'm just excited to get moving. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, I won't take up a ton of time. I'll save that for fellow directors and that haven't had as much time already with this incredible group of people, but I am excited to see the strategic plan timeline. And I love how it's laid out. And I think it makes, I think, all the conversations, especially that Dr. Lynn and I have had, and with kind of that small planning committee, kind of putting all of those ideas and things and thoughts that we had in a really clear, organized, linear timeline. So that's really nice for my brain to see it that way. And I'm excited for this work to get started. And I'm sad that I'm not there in person to see you guys in person. But that's really all I have to say. And so I will pass the floor to people that might have more questions.
We'll finish introductions and then questions. Director Zerschmead.
So hi, I'm Jill Zerschmead. And I'm so sorry I can't be there in person to see you tonight. We have sickness going through the household, and so I don't want to bring my germs to you. But hopefully soon I'll be able to meet you in person. I have been on the Tigard-Tualatin School Board now for 15 years. So I've seen a couple of strategic plans through, and I'm really excited at the equity lens that we're bringing to this version of the strategic plan. It's well past due, and it's exciting work, and I'm really glad to be doing it. And I love your timeline, and so far looks great to me, and I'm really looking forward to hitting the ground and getting the work done.
Director Hammix.
Hi, Zoe. Nice to meet you. This is my first year as a director here, and so, but 8th year in education. Also, I've seen a couple of strategic plans here and there. Yeah, other than that, I'm looking forward to working with you guys and, making sure that equity is always centered, so. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ben Bowman, Chair of the school board. I served before I was on the school board on the previous, with Director Schwartzmead, the previous strategic plan committee. And then I joined the board, I guess it was 2019, which feels like about 36 years ago. But it was not. And my day job is I work for the Department of Education. And we are very excited to have you as partners in this work. And with that, I'll hand it to our superintendent.
Thank you. I really have nothing more to add to that, except it was a pleasure getting to meet all of you last week in my office. And it's giving us a little chance to have some conversation. And certainly, Lisa, you and Janelle were very gracious on Friday when I was in the midst of supporting Projects Now and testing the students. And willing to be flexible with our conversation. But I think that gives you a taste of, number one, we're real flesh and blood people doing real flesh and blood work. And that strategic planning is not just a, every 5 years, but it is part and parcel of who we are each and every day. Even we have to step away from the conversations to take care of students and come back to it. But appreciated the time spent with you and Janelle and your graciousness as well.
All right, so what now? Oh, I'm sorry, Henry. I skipped right over you. And it looks like I think Mojave's going to be here, but for now, you'll have to be our student representative.
My name is Henry Taylor Bowlby. I'm a senior at Tigard High School and the student rep for Tigard. I'm also excited for this plan. I remember in my interview for the board, one of the things that I talked about the most was the strategic plan and the importance of equity. So I'm looking forward to seeing how it turns out, especially with this new focus on it.
We do have 2 additional student representatives to the school board who will likely be involved in this process. And I think Mojave will be there too.
Fantastic. Great. Well, we would love to take this time to just briefly walk through and kind of discuss what you have in front of you in terms of a strategic plan timeline. We have spent a little bit of time with David. Thank you so much for your time in terms of speaking a little bit about how we envision our partnership together throughout this strategic planning process, the goals of TTSD, and then really getting clear on how we can collectively bring in our talents, leverage the great work that the TTS team has already done, much of which we heard earlier today through Director Unn's work with the equity audit, and kick off a really great planning process. So what you have in front of you is just kind of a draft, holistic, high-level view of how we intend to narrow in on some of our work and track through some of our work together. The best way to kind of, I guess, look at this is starting our process and starting our partnering together in January with this high-level goal of accomplishing a final plan in September. So through that, we've talked a little bit about what does that work look like? And I know that our team is excited to engage in some one-on-one conversations with you all and cabinet members throughout that fact-finding phase to get a little bit more clear on our goals around how you see success throughout this process. And we then can be mindful about how we can edit, refine, and think through our process a little bit more. So that fact-finding phase, that initial kind of kickoff, introductions, we really are so happy to be here tonight to be able to put some faces to some names and introduce ourselves. So as we head into some one-on-one conversations that Lisa and Janelle will be participating, that starts tomorrow, which is very exciting tomorrow, that you have some context into our partnership together and a little bit more of an understanding of Point North and who we are. We have also been in great discussion about the work that has already been done by TTSD. So we have prior strategic plans. We have your equity pillars, which has been great. We have the policy ACC documentation. We have your strategic financial plan. So we have some really great background materials that we've started to dig into and have also cultivated a list of additional resources and understandings that will help us continue to understand TTSD's mission throughout the strategic plan process. we were really excited in that kicking off that work to have a conversation with Tracy and Director Rose, I should say, and Director Un in a conversation around the work that TTSD has already done in communications and equity and inclusion. We had that meeting scheduled for Friday, and we are rescheduling that meeting hopefully in the near future. Patty, thank you for all of your wonderful coordination. So we're excited to have a conversation with them to gain a greater understanding around communication best practices, strategies, tools, and tactics that are already utilized by the district. And then all the great work that's already happened through the equity audit process. And I think the presentation tonight just has already excited us and given us a little bit more insight into what's been happening there. All of that.
One of the things that we're trying to do, and what Katie has kind of articulated, is leveraging the work that's already been done. So in an effort to really ensure that we're not only budget conscious, but that we're trying to move along our process as quickly as we can while being inclusive, we want to really spend the time during this fact-finding stage to make sure that we've asked the right questions of the right stakeholders to be able to integrate that into our work together. And so we are trying to be real intentional this month about doing that so that we have a strong foundation to leverage and to build off of.
Yes. And I'd just like to say thank you for starting that policy work already to do, because you've taken a big step forward as a board to be able to look at that. And that is extremely helpful. And it's also with gratitude that not only do you spend time in education during your day work, but you're also doing that. And this is School Board Appreciation Month. And so thank you, Ben, and thank you, Dr. Lynn, and thank you, all of you, for your commitment, because I know as an administrator, it's not easy work. And I can't imagine you at the board level as well.
You've been on the receiving end of the same kind of emails that we would get, I imagine.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
So yeah, to that point, we hope to be able to come back to the conversation with you all on the 24th of this month. I believe there's some slated time for us to have a little bit of a recap in terms of our learnings together. So we would come back and share a little bit about what did we learn throughout this kind of fact-finding phase, and discuss a little bit in terms of our collective goals moving forward. So we're all kind of starting this effort on a very basic understanding foundational process together. So that's kind of the initial fact-finding phase that we plan to embark in, which will lead to what we hope will be a robust community engagement phase, very much leaning on the workings of what is already happening through equity and inclusion at TTSD's, what we heard today, and then also some of the great strategies, tactics, and tools that already exist within the district that Director Rose is utilizing every day. So moving through some community engagement, I really appreciated Director Un's language around understanding what that perception data is. So we've put together some suggested tools and tactics around what that could look like, recognizing that the TTSD has already utilized some tools in regards to listening sessions, surveys, focus groups of that nature. So again, leveraging the resources, we really want to tap into what community engagement has already happened, what has already occurred, what do we already know, what perception data do we already have in front of us, and work with you all at a collaborative level to really lean in on those gaps and try to understand what that current reality is for TTSD. So that's kind of the community engagement phase. We also have been working with Director Moore to understand a little bit more about this community budget process and the ways in which we can kind of concurrently work through and partner through this community budgeting process to leverage some of the community engagement we have proposed throughout this community budget process to ensure that once you start drafting a community budget, that it's informed by some major themes that are coming out of the community engagement process. So our hope is that throughout this process, early April, that we are able to come to the table and say, this is what we've heard so far through our community engagement process in terms of major themes. Director Moore can take that information and utilize that information to help advise your budgeting process. And then this strategic plan refinement process is really where we get to dig in with the work group on the actual review and refinement of the plan. So we were very mindful throughout this RFP process that the request was a review and refinement of the current strategic plan. Reviewing the current strategic plan, the 4 pillars that currently exist are phenomenal, and there's great strategic imperatives and aligned goals within there. And again, we want to leverage the good work that's been done, recognizing that the goal here is really thinking about holistically how the policy ACC can be kind of threaded through a strategic plan refinement and really utilize the equity lens to think about potentially refined goals or new goals, and understand how TTSD wants to, plan for the next 5 years. So that would be our process through some great collaborative workshops.
A couple points to make to build on what Katie's kind of shared. The community engagement is both internal and external engagement. So student involvement will be important. We want to ensure that we have that in reach, so within the district, and then the outreach outside of the district. And that may look like parents and families, it may look like business and community. So really trying to integrate kind of stakeholders into how that strategic plan begins to evolve. And there'll be parallel paths. So even though this looks linear, 1, 2, 3, there'll be some 1, 2, and 4 happening at the same time as 2. So you don't see some of that dimensionality here, but we want to just make sure that in order to reach that timeline, and given summer creates a little bit of scheduling challenges, we want to engage as quickly as we can, not duplicate efforts of the community budget process. We recognize there's one stakeholder community, so we don't want to ask them for feedback in multiple processes. We want to be able to utilize the time with our stakeholders, which we respect and value, and ask them for lots of feedback on lots of different things that will help inform the strategic direction moving forward. So just wanted to make sure that you knew you'll be working at the same time. Our community is providing input as well, and then we'll be threading all that together.
That resonated very strongly with me. Thank you. I love the way that you talked about threading ACC throughout. That has been a priority for me, so I love that. And I also was concerned about the finite amount of time that folks have for community engagement. So I love that we'll be kind of working those together. So colleagues, questions or comments that you would like to offer to our new partners?
Ben, I would ask the 3 of you, well, the 4 of you at the table, if you could just make sure you have a mic right in front of you, because I'm not hearing the board and the superintendent as well as I'm hearing the presenters.
You hear the presenters better than you hear the board?
Yeah, but what I just heard now from you was great.
Okay, we might adjust our mics down to fix that. Thanks for flagging that. Any questions or comments?
So I did wonder, as you were talking about, I know we had some conversation about the community budget process and involving community and getting their input. And I know we had talked about how the district kind of has a process in place. And I guess I was curious, either from Director Moore or Dr. Sue's standpoint, sort of how this would shift that existing process.
Yeah, so Director Lynn, I had the opportunity to meet with Lisa and Katie on Friday, and we talked about that in a little more detail than we had in the past. And where we landed is pretty much from the outset, my mind was we're going to have an abbreviated budget process this year because of this other work that was going to be going on with the community. And rather than develop 2 different work groups, it made sense to have the same people, the same stakeholder group informing, as Katie mentioned, helping inform our budget from the themes that are coming out of that community engagement. And so we kind of, later tonight, we'll ask the board to consider the budget calendar. And I had a placeholder on there for a lot of the initial community engagement work going on related to strategic planning in February and March. Well, that doesn't leave a lot of time before May that we have to have a budget in front of the budget committee. So what I propose is that we have a very much abbreviated budget process the first couple weeks of April, perhaps time for probably no more than 2 meetings, that we would have the engagement group consider what the themes have been to date through the community engagement process and determine how we can use those themes to inform allocation of resources in the budget.
Great question. Director Schwartzmead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think it makes a ton of sense to run the budget and the strategic plan input groups at the same time, because when you're talking about money, you're talking about what's important to people. And when you're talking about strategic plan, you're talking about what's important to people. And so it's going to be the same stuff. And so duplicating those efforts would make no sense. And since we are in a time crunch on both of them, I'm really glad to hear you say that we're going to mesh them together. It makes a ton of sense to me. So thank you.
Okay. Well, then we might have a little extra time unless there's other thoughts or questions or homework you have for us.
Oh, we could have given you homework.
All right. Well, we are very grateful that you made the trip and be here with us this evening, and we're going to have a long and great partnership with each other. It's very exciting. So thank you again. And with that, I will close the work session at 5:44 p.m.